Okay, you guys watch this fish while I get on with things here. Okay, I'm still here. I'm doing stuff. Doing stuff. God help me. Let me see. God, these things are slow. Slow, slow, slow. Seriously, what do you think, Fishy? Yeah, I agree. Totally slow. Too slow. All right. And we got that, and we got that, and we got that. Okay, it's good. It's good. All right. So, there we are. Hello, good evening. Happy Sunday. I'm Tad. I am here. Thank you for those of you putting up with me and changing the time on you. And I hope you all managed to make sense out of it. I did not know exactly what was going to be happening. And we did, as I had said, went out to birthday dinner. I was explaining last night that the balloons are not for me. It's not my birthday. No birthday wishes for me, thank you. But for one of our young people. And so tonight we went over the hill and went to a very cool Japanese restaurant called Gyukaku, I believe. It's one of those like you cook for yourself at the table, which basically in my case means you eat about 16 pounds of meat. Whew! So, so I'm full of protein, and probably unstoppable by any force known to humankind. So, but all I'm going to be doing is reading. But, if I had to suddenly, I don't know, like go into hand to hand combat with some kind of extraterrestrial or something, bet on me because I've been eating a lot of beef. A lot of beef. This is fish. This is not actually my fish per se. This is the cat's fish, but the cat honestly doesn't give a damn about the fish, as charming as the fish is. And it is a very charming, realistic fish. But the cat doesn't care, so there it goes again. Anyway, so anything else to tell? No, I read last night. Kind of had to stop in the middle of a chapter. The fish will stop making that noise in a moment. There's the cat over in the corner there. Whoop, whoop, whoop. There she is. She looks much darker. She's actually just a normal reddish tabby type cat. That's Lily, if you don't remember. We're down to 4 pets now in the family. At one point we had 6 or 7 of them, and it's tragic. We've kind of just through sheer attrition, old age of animals, we're down to 2 dogs, a cat, and a snake. And I don't get to see the snake much, although she's a lovely snake. For those of you who care about these things, the cat's name is Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, named in honor of the late Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, although she turned out to be a female snake. So she's still Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, but they just call her Irwin. Cat Lily, large dog John, who is going to have a miserable day tomorrow because it's going to be rainy and windy. which means he's going to be walking all over my chest starting early in the morning or whenever the storm comes in to let me know that he's not happy. And a small but senior dog, Chihuahua Walter, who basically looks like kind of like a rat on stilts. He's very slender. He's what they call a deer-headed Chihuahua, as opposed to an apple-headed Chihuahua. And frankly, if I were a Chihuahua, I'm not sure I'd want to be called either of those things, but that's how they parse out Chihuahua heads. So we've got down to 4 now. Down to 4. We've got as many kids in the house as we do pets. It's still way too many of everything, but as I said, I'm letting attrition take its course, and we'll see who is the next to go. It's going to be like an Agatha Christie mystery. And soon, only one will survive, and that will be me. No, actually, probably won't. At the stress levels around here most of the time, I'll probably be the next to go. But anyway, doesn't matter. So we are going to be reading tonight. Anything else I was going to talk about before I say hello to whoever has showed up? No, just the usual stuff. I'm working. The new book is officially out on the stores. I've had some really nice responses on Twitter and Facebook about it, and I'm very pleased. I'm extremely glad that that all you guys who have bothered to comment seem to like it, although I'm sure that could mean that there are thousands and thousands of people out there loathing me who haven't bothered to comment. But I will pretend that only the people who've had nice things to say are the only ones who've read it so far. Anyway, it doesn't matter, though, because you write what you write, and you hope that people will enjoy it. And that's all I can do, and I'm not complaining. I'm always happy when I have a new book out, because on one level, it just brings people a little bit closer to where I'm at, because I'm always a book or two ahead of what the readers are reading. And then when the new book comes out, momentarily the readers are closer to catching up with me. So right now, you're only a book and a half behind me, since I still got a good chunk of the last King of Ostenard. I've got the third book pretty much finished. I've got the fourth book still to be finished, but you're closer than you were. So anyway, and that's always a nice thing for me, because I always am out of sync with the audience. One of the things I miss about stuff like when I did radio or when I played in a band or did theater was that you had this immediate feedback, where people would clearly let you know, yeah, this is crap. We hate you, which is not necessarily a great thing to know, but it's much better to know it when you can still do something about it. If you're on stage and people are giving that, what is this look, or whatever, or if you're working a radio station and the phone lines are lighting up with people to say, who is this idiot? At least you have a chance to react and to do something different. Whereas by the time you've finished a book, and you've put a year or 2 years into it or whatever, and it's gone through all the publication process, the rewriting, the editorial comments, the copy editing, the proofreading, everything. You can't do anything, so then it goes out into the world, and you're already way off on the next projects, and you have to just deal with whatever comes in about it, but you can't fix it. If there's something wrong with it. So fortunately, I get more kind reviews than I do unpleasant ones. And I'm happy to try to keep it that way, because I'm a big softie. And as I said to somebody somewhere, I don't remember where, but on social media, although I've said it other places too, one bad review, even if it's from somebody who is clearly not even literate, even if it's like, this guy can't write at all, that completely undoes the benefits of 10 brilliantly written, clever, insightful, empathetic reviews. Just one person going, I hate that Williams guy. It's like, I spend the rest of the week walking around going, how have I failed? How have I failed that poor illiterate reader? That's not really fair. Some people don't like my books and they're quite literate. But anyway, I mean, whereas 10 people going, oh, God, I'm so glad to have another book from you. I loved it. I love the characters. Those are all good, and I enjoy it when I let myself read reviews, which is not often. But as I said, one review, bad review from somebody, or just one negative comment, and I'm shattered. So as a result, I kind of tend to stay away from reviews, even though most of them are good, because I kind of feel like, why should I believe the good ones and not believe the bad ones? Just because I want to believe the good ones doesn't mean that they're right and the negative ones are bad. Anyway, it's a weird, complicated subject. But so I don't read as many reviews as I used to when I was younger. And of course, another reason for that is you learn very quickly as a writer or as any kind of purveyor of anything that gets reviewed in public, whether theater, film, painting, sculpture, anything where people dance, anytime where people come to your work and then turn around and talk about it to other people, you tend to take things very personally, and I try not to, and I'm better at it than some writers, some writers have literally given up writing because of bad reviews or something. And as I said, fortunately, I don't get that many of those. But it's still hard not to take it personally when you've put so much of yourself into something. It's very hard when somebody says, this is stupid, or this is badly done, or, this is derivative, or blah. It's really hard to be able to just go, well, that's one person's opinion. I don't agree with them. I wish I was better at it. I don't think there are probably very many people in the arts who are good at it, but if there are, I'd love to meet some of them and see if they have any tips, because I find it's easier to just avoid reviews entirely or mostly, rather than have the ups and downs. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, guys, it's too late for me. I can't do anything else for a living. It's been years since I've sold insurance or shoes or, managed an art store or any of those other things I used to do. So I'm stuck with writing. I can't afford to get depressed about it. I have to continue the way I am, which is loving what I do. And so it's not a good idea to get too caught up in, what the public thinks. Anyway. So a lot of bibble babble as usual. What else? Anything else of interest? Can't think of anything. I'm sure next week I'll have stories to tell you about my poor dog who hates storms. He already had a tough night tonight because we were out for 3 or 4 hours having dinner. And he and the other dog just do not particularly like being left behind. And to be honest, like a lot of pandemic pups and cats and other animals, but especially dogs, because they're such pack animals. A lot of pandemic pets have been suffering, as their owners or people start to go back to the regular world again a bit, as the pandemic has eased a little bit with the vaccines. And Johnny in particular, big dog Johnny, he doesn't even like us to leave the room, let alone the house. So, he's always miserable when I go on tour. My kids are always sending me pictures of him sitting by the front door, staring, waiting for me to come back. Anyway, okay, so we're going to go back to the Dragons of Ordinary Farm. I'm not going to try to update you because there's like all kinds of stuff happening at the moment. Basically, the only things you really need to know, Tyler is led. There's a lot of things going on at the farm. That there's a helicopter appears to have landed somewhere on the property. Steve Carrillo, one of the neighbors, because the neighbor kids snuck over in the night because they couldn't find out what was going on, and the messages they sent were never passed on to Tyler and Lucinda. So the neighbor kids have snuck over in the night, but one of the neighbor kids, Steve, has fallen into the washstand mirror, and Tyler, realizing that somebody has to do something, has gone in after him. So that's going on, and meanwhile, Lucinda is hearing the voice of the dragon in her head, and she's trying to deal with that, and just all kinds of stuff's going on. So anyway, this is chapter 24 that we're reading. Whoops, right there, which is called Squirrel Meets World. But the squirrel already met the world, because in order to do what he had to do, Tyler led the squirrel into the unicorn pasture and summoned the unicorns by banging on their feeding trough. And as far as we can tell, the squirrel got stomped by a whole herd of unicorns. So anyway, then the last thing is Lucinda has realized that from the news that the Carrillo kids gave her about the helicopter, that something is going on, and she needs to tell some of the responsible people on the farm. So she's leaving Carmen and Alma in the library where the haunted mirror is that their brother has fallen into, and her brother, Lucinda's brother, has followed. And she's going back to the house to try and find somebody responsible to tell them about the helicopter. So that's where we are. Okay. Only Sarah, Azinza, and Pema were still in the kitchen, leisurely scrubbing out the last of the dishes and preparing for tomorrow's breakfast. "What are you doing up so late, child?" asked Sarah. "And why do you want Ragnar? He has gone to the sick barn, I think. The dragon is very difficult again today." "She lost her baby," said Azinza in her lordly manner. "Of course she's sad." Lucinda didn't stay to answer their questions. She was terrified that Mrs. Needle might appear. She thanked the women and headed out toward the sick barn. Things were getting more confused every moment. What was she supposed to do if she couldn't find Ragnar? Wake up Gideon so he could learn there were strangers on the property? Including the Carrillo kids, one of whom had apparently fallen through a mirror and perhaps into the fault line? She could feel the unhappiness of the dragon Meseret in her head while she was still 50 yards away from the sick barn. The dragon was making a strange, low groaning that Lucinda had never heard before. The first waves of Meseret's powerful thoughts, just beginning to wash over Lucinda's mind, were almost incoherent, in no recognizable form except anguish and fury. "No, no, 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 no." Lucinda hesitated at the door of the immense concrete cylinder, suddenly afraid to step inside. It was like walking into a blazing oven of unhappy emotions. "Ragnar?" she called, but no one answered. "Ragnar? Mr. Walkwell?" She stepped through the door. She could see the dragon's back as the monster writhed in her pen, the restraints creaking as they stretched. A shape in a white hooded safety suit was standing at the edge of the pen, aiming a rifle at Meseret's vast, shuddering bulk. "Stop!" Lucinda shrieked. "What are you doing? Don't shoot her!" She ran toward the pen. The figure turned its faceless, plastic-shielded head toward her for a moment, waved violently at her to stay back, then turned to the dragon again and pulled the trigger. Lucinda couldn't even hear the sound of the gun firing over the dragon's groaning, and nothing seemed to happen. Meseret still struggled on, her thoughts flooding Lucinda's head in a meaningless roar of upset. "No, no, no, no." Haneb pulled off his hood. His black hair was lank with sweat, his scarred face full of amazement and fear. "Get back! She's dangerous. I give her medicine to sleep." "Medicine?" She turned to look at the dragon and saw a clump of feathers wagging on Meseret's near haunch, so red it was almost orange under the bright fluorescent lights. "Is that a dart?" She could feel the chaos of the dragon's thoughts begin to calm a little. "To make her sleep, yes. But stay back. Half-hour until she sleeps, maybe an hour." The dragon groaned again, this one a sound that was almost human in its misery. Her thoughts, perhaps because of the sedative, were clear enough now for Lucinda to understand. "Egg thief runs. Egg goes away. Going now. Fly, fly. Lucinda turned on Haneb. She's upset about her egg again. What did you do to her? Why does she think you stole it? Haneb's look of dismay turned to something deeper, an expression of utter panic. She speaks to you? What did you do? Why does she hate you so much? He took a few steps back. If this had been a vampire movie, Lucinda felt sure, he would have been flashing his crucifix at her. Then, to her astonishment, the little man began to weep. I did not want, he cried. I did not want to take the egg. Please do not tell Mr. Gideon. Mr. Colin, make me take. Meseret groaned and thrashed. Her head snaked around on her long neck as she began to bite at her restraints. If she was about to fall unconscious, Lucinda thought, she was doing a pretty good job of not showing it. She turned back to Haneb, who had fallen to his knees. What do you mean Colin made you? He want egg. He make me take it, or he tell Gideon I sneak out to the town one day. Just to look. But Colin say, Gideon, send me back to where I come from, if I don't help. Now the great she-dragon wants to kill me. He was so upset she could hardly understand him, and the pounding of Meseret's thoughts in her skull wasn't making it any easier, but she was beginning to get the point. You mean Colin has the egg? It didn't get stolen by the other dragon, by Alamu? But Haneb wasn't talking anymore. He had buried his face in his hands and was sobbing. Now the dragon began to fight, even harder. Egg, her thoughts bellowed, taking away now, stealing. And with the ideas, a sort of vision came into Lucinda's head, of a hunched, slightly glowing shape moving through the dark, not so much seen as sensed, like the night vision option on that combat game of Tyler's. But the object that the glowing figure carried glowed more brightly still, an egg-shaped smear of warmth. It's happening right now, Lucinda realized. She can sense someone taking her egg away right now. Yes, egg. Meseret was biting ever more frantically against the restraints, not caring if her teeth dug into her own scaled skin. Blood dribbled down her side, purple-black under the fluorescence. Egg! Now! The thoughts were still understandable, but wavery, as though they came from beneath water. The sedative might at last be starting to take effect, Lucinda decided, with relief. Then one of the heavy restraints, frayed by Meseret's teeth, snapped with a gunshot noise. Pow! Another went, and then another. Pow! 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 Like fireworks. A moment later, the dragon had freed enough of herself to get her midsection up over the edge of the pen, bending back the metal fence at the top like it was no more than a cheap spoon stuck in frozen ice cream. Her head stretched over the edge, one of the restraints still flapping like a scarf around her neck. Her red gold eyes were wide, rolling, and Lucinda gave up any thought of trying to communicate with this many-ton monstrosity. The idea that her stolen egg was somewhere close by had all but driven the dragon mad, and the sedative wasn't helping much. Lucinda screamed to Haneb, but the little man was crouching, holding his head. He had faced the male dragon bravely, but something about this situation was too much for him. He looked like he was waiting to die. Still wrapped in torn restraints, Meseret dragged the bulk of her body out of the pen, her long, wing-fringed front legs hunching and stretching as she struggled across the room, knocking over the tables, smashing the equipment. One of the trailing harnesses caught in a set of shelves, and the whole thing was yanked off the wall and onto the concrete floor, scattering liquids and broken glass everywhere. The dragon crashed past both Lucinda and Haneb and butted the door of the sick barn with her huge head, smashing it off its hinges. But the rest of the door frame and the semicircular wall was concrete, and she could not get past it. She roared in desperate frustration. Lucinda could hear it echoing across the farm. Egg! Egg! The creature's thoughts were so furious and powerful that they burned in Lucinda's head like fire. She bashed at the wall around the broken door like the biggest woodpecker in the universe, but the concrete would not yield, even to her great strength. With another bellow of frustration, she turned and headed toward the other end of the sick barn. Lucinda was right in the dragon's way. Everything around her seemed to ooze into a stately crawl, like a slow-motion video replay. Only her thoughts were moving quickly. The tranquilizer rifle was gone, buried under debris, and Haneb was still down on the floor. He might even be dead already, felled by flying metal. Lucinda bent and picked up the box by her foot that said "Trank Darts" in large felt-tipped letters. Underneath it had been written, "Big Animals, Thiam, Fank, Scop Mix," which she hoped meant the drugs were already in the darts. Meseret was coming toward her, stripping metal shelves from the wall with her lashing tail, oblivious to anything except the big back door with its metal shutters at the far end of the sick barn. Lucinda reached carefully into the box. There was only one dart left, a cylindrical tube the size of a roll of toilet paper, marked like a hypodermic with a tail of feathers at one end and a thick needle about 4 inches long covered with a plastic cap. Meseret was on top of her, big as a bus and seemingly blind with rage. Lucinda tried hard to keep her eyes open as the monster bore down on her. She held up her trembling hand, ready to try to punch through the ridiculously thick skin with the needle, but at the last moment the dragon swerved around her. Lucinda had only a half-second of relief before the remains of Meseret's restraints whipped over her as the dragon thundered past, knocking the needle from Lucinda's hand and tangling her in canvas straps. It got worse. Before she even had a chance to scream, Lucinda was jerked off her feet and dragged backward across the laboratory floor, through upturned tables and bits of broken glassware, as the dragon crawled swiftly across the barn toward the loading door. Lucinda couldn't untangle her foot. Her own weight was pulling the knot of straps tight around her ankle. It was all she could do to pull herself double to get her head off the floor. The dragon smashed hard against the metal loading door, where the large animals were brought into the barn on the flat car. It rattled but did not give, and Lucinda swung in the straps and thumped painfully against the wall and the dragon's immense, scaly hip. Meseret groaned again. "Out! Egg!" Lucinda banged hard into something else as the dragon twisted and threw herself once more against the unyielding door. Meseret didn't even know she was there and probably wouldn't care. Lucinda struggled to get a chest full of breath. "Haneb!" she screamed. "Open the door! She's going to kill me if you don't!" Again and again Lucinda was smacked bruisingly against hard surfaces as the dragon tried to batter down the heavy door. She had hit her head at least twice, and she was finding it hard now to think. "Please, Haneb!" she shouted, but she had no idea if he was even conscious. Then Lucinda heard a deep bass rumble. She thought at first it was the dragon again, groaning in frustration, but then she saw black sky and spotlights where a moment before there had only been the loading gate. The door was rising. Either Haneb had heard her or Meseret had somehow triggered the mechanism. Lucinda struggled, but she was still hopelessly tangled. A moment later they were out into the darkness and cold air. The dragon was running, dragging Lucinda along the ground. Bump, bump, then something struck her on the head. Dizzy. Suddenly, there was no ground anywhere, only rushing wind, and Lucinda was swinging free in nothingness, whipped back and forth at the end of a tangle of canvas straps as the ground fell away beneath them and the dragon took to the sky. And chapter 26. Whoops. Let me see if I can face that better. Chapter 26, the Youre Bill. By the way, I'm going to cheat on this one. There's going to be a lot of things like this that I'm going to be reading, a lot of words like this. They're backwards, and that's much easier to see as text. So just assume it's backward, and if necessary, I'll stop and explain what they are. So this one obviously is library, backward, Youre Bill. Chapter 26. Going through the mirror was like crossing half a second's worth of freezing black space. Tyler rolled across the washstand on the far side and hopped down to the floor. As he had guessed, everything in the room was a mirror reverse of the room he had just left, except for one thing. The other room had been full of people, the Carrillo girls and his sister, but he was alone in this one. "Steve!" he shouted and pushed through the door into what should have been the mirror version of the library. "Steve Carrillo!" It was only then that he realized he might be in more trouble than he had even guessed. Outside the door, he found himself in an unfamiliar corridor, something that had nothing to do with what he had left behind on the other side of the mirror. It was dark and covered with dirty, ancient wallpaper like some parts of the house he had seen, but like nothing in the real library. One solitary, flickering oil lamp gave the only light, a weak glow extending a few yards down the corridor on each side. He would have to choose a direction. He listened but heard nothing. "Steve?" When nothing came back to him but a faint, distant scratching, he turned in the direction of the noise and began carefully to make his way forward. It was only as the door he had come through fell away behind him that he wondered, why an oil lamp? Old as they were, the real house and library at least had electricity. He turned the corridor and found a new oil lamp and a forking of the way. To his right, a wide, dark stairway led downward. He could see a few levels into its depths before the light of the lamp would carry no farther. The corridor itself led beside the open space of the stairwell. Two signs hung on the wall below the lamp. One had an arrow pointing down and read Ralek. The other pointed straight ahead and said Youre Bill. Cellar and library. It was easy enough to figure out and sort of made sense for the far side of the mirror. What he didn't understand was why there was a cellar here when there wasn't one under the real house, at least not that he knew of, and why the library seemed so much farther away than the real library, the one in his world. Maybe it wasn't just a mirror version, everything exactly the same, but in reverse. Uncle Gideon had said something about the fault line being about time, but Octavio Tinker had written in his journal that alternate realities, alternate worlds were possible too. So what was behind the washstand mirror at Ordinary Farm might be only another version of Ordinary Farm. Which meant, he suddenly realized, that he had no real idea of what might be here at all. He leaned over the railing, looking down the stairwell into the lightless cellar depths. "Steve?" he called. "You down there?" A dry scratching whispered up from the depths, as if someone was dragging dead leaves and discarded snakeskins up the stairs. It didn't sound like Steve Carrillo at all, but it did sound like it was slowly coming closer. Tyler hurried along the corridor toward the Youre Bill. He found it at last, at the end of what seemed like a mile of turning, poorly lit passages. It was at least as big as the real library, maybe bigger, and at least as full of shelves as the other. It wasn't laid out in straight lines, but in haphazard clusters of tables and shelves and other strange furniture. In fact, if there were such things as haunted libraries, this sure looked like one of them. Many of the flickering lights on the walls here weren't even oil lamps, but actual candles. Their flames jiggled when he passed, which made his shadow seem to dance and jump on the walls. Stephen? Steve Carrillo? Where are you? He thought he heard a noise. Not the scratchy hiss and scrape he'd heard on the cellar steps, but a muffled sound like someone calling from another room. He made his way quietly across the big central space, looking without much interest at the backward lettered spines of the books on the shelves. There were pictures on the wall of this library, too, although he didn't see anything quite like the big portrait of Octavio Tinker. Most of these pictures showed weird-looking old people in even weirder clothing. A few of them were of places, dark, stormy oceans and lonely mountaintops. Glass cases stood in some of the library's open spaces, full of weird objects that looked as though they'd come from the oldest, dustiest attic imaginable. One purple-black ball caught his eye because it looked like a huge gem. He peered into the case to read the label, which said, Gay Sretnap. Panther's egg? What kind of silly crap was that? Not that there might not be some interesting things to explore here some other time, if only the place wasn't so creepy. Something rustled nearby, and Tyler whirled around in time to see a flick of shadow disappearing behind one of the library stacks. Steve? He called. Nobody answered. Now he went more quickly, trying to keep to the open spaces at the center of the room. Who knew how big it was on this side of the mirror? Maybe it was a whole world. Tyler began to feel quite hopeless about ever finding the boy from the neighboring farm. He raised his voice a little. Steve? Steve? It wasn't an echo that whispered through the room, but something stranger and far more disturbing, as though a creature that had never spoken before was trying to imitate his voice. Tyler turned again and saw a cluster of shadows down one of the aisles, something that looked as though it was covered with swinging rags and moved in a hunched-over, sideways motion like a crab. It was visible only for a moment, then scuttled away into the darkness beyond the candle flames again. The cracked voice whispered from the shadows. Then the shape appeared again, one row nearer this time. The rags waved like seaweed straining for the surface and the light. Tyler ran. He crossed the nearest part of the library in moments, trying to put as many shelves as he could between himself and whatever was following him. He found himself in a gallery of ancient photographs along the back wall, black and white pictures of half-built machinery and monuments. A door stood ajar, and he ducked through it into a hallway beyond, closing it behind him as quietly as he could. The corridor was lined with more old photos. Children wearing ceremonial outfits so strange they looked like Halloween costumes, fantastical combinations of scarves and turbans and long coats. He pushed himself back against the wall between two pictures and tried to be absolutely silent. When a few minutes had passed without any new noise, and the door between himself and the library still remained shut, he began to breathe a little easier. He was just mopping the sweat off his forehead when a voice spoke quietly beside his ear. "I think it's gone now." Tyler squeaked and jumped. He looked up and down the hallway, but there was nothing and nobody to be seen. "I'm here," the voice said. A woman's voice, shaky with age, but calm and refined, like something you might hear on television. "Turn around." Tyler turned, his heart beating so fast he felt weak in the knees. Then he saw something moving and took a step closer to the wall. One of the two rectangles he had stood between was not a photo like the others, but some kind of ironwork grill in the wall. On the other side of it, barely visible in the uneven lamplight, was what looked like a woman's face and a suggestion of white hair. "I didn't mean to frighten you," she said. "Who are you? Why are you out when the Bandersnatch is hunting?" Bandersnatch? The name seemed familiar. "That's just what I call it, like in the old story. Or is it a rhyme?" She laughed a little, and for the first time she didn't sound quite right. I can't remember everything I should. In fact, I can't remember much of anything." It suddenly hit him who he might be talking to. "Grace? Are you Grace?" She didn't seem to hear him. "You really should find somewhere to hide. There's nothing I can do for you. I'm too frightened of that thing. It's been after me for years." "Where are you?" Tyler leaned forward, trying to get a good look at her face, but his sudden movement startled her, and she moved back. He was terrified he might lose her. "Don't go away! Where are you? How can I get to where you are?" "You can't. At least I don't know how. I'm lost right now myself." She sounded sad about it, but not devastated, as though it happened fairly often. "You mean you can't get to me either?" "No." He thought he saw her shake her head. "But you need to find some place safer. The Bandersnatch it can find you. And it can be very quiet. It likes the shadows. Look for the light. There's a place at the top of the library where it hardly ever goes. Too bright." She started to move back from the grating. "Be careful. What did the poem say? Beware the jub-jub bird and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. Something like that. Wait! Are you Grace?" The face hesitated, half gone into the shadows. "Grace? Is that your name? Are you Grace, Gideon's wife? I'm his nephew, Tyler." "Grace." She sounded as though she was drifting away. "The name is familiar. Gideon. Gideon? I remember. I think I remember." For a moment she disappeared from the grill entirely. Then her face reappeared and her fingers came through the bars, dangling something shiny. "Take this. Give it to—" No, Gideon, he gave it to—" It slid from her and chinked to the floor, coiling there like a tiny gleaming snake. When he stood up again with the gold locket and chain in his hand, she was gone. The last thing Tyler had wanted to do was go back into the library, but he had to find Steve. The only alternative was to look for him down in the cellar, and Tyler knew it would be a long time before he decided to do that. Grace, if that was the woman behind the grating, had told him to head for the high part of the library, that he would be safest where it was brightest. He moved as quickly across the library floor as he could, staying out in the open until he found the main staircase. This led up to a level that ran all the way around the top of the great room. But then a set of stairs rose from there toward the building's pitched ceiling, a floor that seemed to have been used as an attic, with boxes of old books and clothing and other things stacked haphazardly all around. Tyler climbed the steps as quietly as he could. It was indeed brighter than the rest of the library, up on the platform below the ceiling. It was flooded with flickering oil light from the central chandelier, but there were also dormer windows in the top of the roof that let in the light from an oily gray sky. "If you stand on a pile of boxes, you can see the rest of the house," someone said. This time, the voice wasn't quite as much of a shock. Tyler managed to stifle his shriek of alarm before he turned and found Steve Carrillo sitting cross-legged on the floor, carving a piece of wood with an antique pocket knife. "Steve!" said Tyler, relief washing through him. The black-haired boy looked at him, puzzled. "Do I know you?" "Do you know me? I'm Tyler. You came to find us, remember? You and your sisters?" Steve squinted for a moment. "Tyler. Yeah. It's just that I've been here so long." "What do you mean? You just came through a little while ago." The look of confusion came back to Steve Carrillo's face. "Days. I've been here for days and days." "Look, never mind. We have to get you back. Come on." Tyler turned and headed for the stairwell, but quickly realized no one was following him. "Steve!" The other boy looked pale with alarm. "I'm not going down there. It'll get me." "That Sanderbatch thing?" Tyler shook his head. "We'll just stay in the open. Maybe we can find a flashlight or something. I don't think it likes light." Steve shook his head emphatically. It's made out of dust and paper, I think. I hear it all the time. It's just waiting for me to come down. Look, don't you want to see your family again? Your sisters, your mom and dad?" Steve looked at him doubtfully. "Trust me, I'll get us back." A thought occurred to Tyler. "You find any matches up here?" Once they were through the library and into the corridors beyond, they lit the bundles of mirror-written book pages Tyler had tied to two halves of a broken broom handle. The paper was so old and damp it burned slowly. Torches in hand, they scurried along the passageways, talking only in whispers, stopping every few minutes when Stephen's courage started to fade. He really did act like someone who had been here months, not minutes. He really did act like someone who had been here for months, not minutes, Tyler thought. Like a prisoner of war in some movie, his spirit almost crushed. Every echo of their own passage made Steve jump like a rabbit, and Tyler couldn't imagine what would happen if they actually ran into something serious. He would probably just fall down and die. Finally, in an effort to take the other boy's mind off what was happening, Tyler began talking about their escape as if it was a video game. "Okay, we're finally at the end of the first level. We just have to go a little farther. We've earned a lot of rubies." "Life points pretty low," Steve groaned, but at least he was playing along. "Look, we're almost through. We beat the boss, so we're pretty much home free." "We haven't beaten the boss," Stephen said. They were nearing the stairway to the cellar now, which to Tyler meant they were almost out, but Stephen was walking slower and slower. "The boss lives down there, in the Rallick." He stopped. "Hear that?" Much to his sorrow, Tyler did. It was the scraping, dragging, rustling noise he had heard before, getting slowly louder as it came up from the depths. "Follow me," he said. "Run!" The torch flame streamed behind them until Stephen had to drop his before it burned his hand. Tyler briefly wondered about setting the corridor on fire behind them. It surely wouldn't burn through to the real-world side of the mirror. But then he remembered the sad, confused eyes of the woman behind the grating. He turned back and stamped out Stephen's sparking, sputtering torch, then began to run again. He didn't know what made him look back just before they got to the room with the mirror. It wasn't a sound. Whatever was following them was as noiseless now as ash blown on the wind. Perhaps it was a feeling, the idea that something was fluttering along behind them like an untethered shadow. But once he looked, he wished he hadn't. All he could see of the indistinct shape was a face made of shadow, and all he could see of that face was hunger and loneliness and madness. They crashed through the door into the mirror bedroom. Tyler pushed Steve headfirst into the washstand mirror and then dived after him into the silver mercury reflection. Carmen and Alma wouldn't let go of Steve. The girls were crying, but Steve was like someone who'd just woken up from a strange dream. "Where's Lucinda?" Tyler asked, then felt his stomach grow heavy with dread when they told him. I have to go," he said. "I have to go after her. It's that guy your dad was talking to Mr. Walkwell about. Stillman, the rich guy. The helicopter must be his." He sighed. He was exhausted and scared, and all he wanted to do now was go to bed. Wasn't this night ever going to end? He didn't want any more answers about Ordinary Farm, because all they did was lead to more questions. "Oh, you'd better come with me," he said a moment later. "It may be the only chance to sneak you off the property. We might have the police here by morning, especially if your parents find out you're gone." "It seemed like a good idea when I thought of it," said Steve Carrillo sadly. "Yeah, I get a lot of those too." "No more magical mirrors, right?" Steve asked. "No more mirrors. We're just going to get you off the farm as quietly as possible." "That sounds good," Steve said, sounding a little more like his old self. "I don't want any more excitement tonight, that's for sure." Okay, and let's see how many chapters we've got left. I may finish this one up next week. All right, so I'm going to read a little bit of the beginning of this one since we got a few minutes left. Woo! This is like Dr. Tongue's 3D House of Stewardesses. Woo! Woo! Chapter 27, No Tricks. Colin Needle had to admit he was a little nervous. Oh, by the way, in case you're wondering if that was a call out to some weird porn movie, Dr. Tongue's 3D House of Horror Stewardesses is an old SCTV comedy sketch. So just in case any of you are out there going, "Well, that was weird." And on the Dr. Tongue show, because it was supposed to be 3D, of course it really wasn't, but they would always like pick something up and then go doo-doop, 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 like that. Anyway, so that's what made me think of it. Chapter 27, No Tricks. Colin Needle had to admit he was a little nervous. It wasn't sneaking across Ordinary Farm by night with a stolen dragon's egg that was worrying him. He'd been preparing to do this part for days, and had been back and forth over the route with an appropriately sized rock in his backpack a half-dozen times, practicing until he knew every potential hazard with or without a flashlight. No, it was the way the stakes of the game had been raised that worried him. First off, Colin had never wanted to make a deal with this Stillman fellow. If he had known the true story of Jude Modesto's important client, he felt sure he would have abandoned the whole project. But he had already given Modesto the chip from Messeret's previous egg before he found out, and apparently Stillman had tested it and decided it was very, very interesting indeed, so it was too late to turn back. Still, Colin had to admit that the $500,000 would make it easier to deal with his own conscience. He would have asked for more, but he needed to be able to carry it back himself, and this way Stillman would be even more eager to come back for such one-of-a-kind bargains in the future, and Colin would supply them to him. Second, things would have been much easier if Modesto could have waited just a few days more to set up the meeting. The Jenkins kids would have gone back home, and Colin's distraction for Ragnar and Walkwell would have been ready. He had planned to arrange an escape from its pen by the Bonacon, a slow-moving but immensely strong and stubborn bull-like animal that sprayed caustic dung. Recapturing it would have taken them most of the night. Modesto's sudden email demanding the sale take place tonight had meant that he had been forced to improvise instead. So Colin had left a glove, part of a pair he had bought but never used, near the barbed wire fence out on the edge of the property, then made an innocent quote-unquote remark at dinner about having seen a surprising number of cars and other activity out on Springs Road, near where he had left the telltale glove. He figured that should keep them busy for at least the first couple of hours of darkness, searching for intruders out at the farthest point of the property from his rendezvous with Jude Modesto. Colin certainly hoped so. He didn't want to look up and find himself staring into Walkwell's weird, angry eyes. That man, no, that goat-horned thing, scared Colin Needle almost as much as his mother did, and that was saying something. Still, it shouldn't have been this way. Everything would have been so much simpler without the Jenkins kids. Sure, it had been occasionally interesting to have people his own age around the farm, and Lucinda was okay. But Colin Needle had big plans, and having Gideon's relatives around just made things more difficult. He stopped to rest on top of a hill beyond an abandoned barn where he could look back toward the house. All good so far. No more than the ordinary number of lights on. Gideon's study and bedroom, the kitchen, a few along the porch, and the other outside doors. So much of the house was unlighted at night, and most of the time you couldn't even begin to guess at its immense size. Only on bright moonlit nights like this one could you see the array of roofs, the covered arcades and outbuildings, and the unusual silo and tower rooms that made ordinary farm look like some strange oriental palace. And it's going to be my palace someday, he thought with no little satisfaction, because I'm the only one who really cares about it, or at least I'm the only one with any sense, any guts. He heaved up the backpack. The egg was no easy burden, big and lopsided as a partially deflated beach ball, but heavy as a sandbag. He got the straps over his shoulders again and made his way down into the shadowy, oak-shrouded valley beside Junction Road, out of the moon's glare. Colin hadn't really expected a helicopter, let alone the biggest helicopter he'd ever seen. Its dark hide gleamed like the shell of a beetle as it crouched on the hilltop half a mile from the road, its rotors lazily turning. It had no markings, but Colin had a feeling that the darker patch on its side was something covering a corporate logo. Stillman's Mission Software, most likely. His stomach tightened. Several men were waiting outside the copter's open bay door. Colin wasn't simply going to walk up to them with the treasure in his hands, of course. He wasn't a fool. He'd read plenty of spy novels and seen plenty of movies, and he knew all about double crosses. He'd even thought about one of his own, substituting something for the real dragon egg before selling it, so he certainly didn't trust Jude Modesto not to cheat him. While he was still in the shadows, he took off the heavy backpack and hung it over the branch of a tree, high enough to be almost impossible to see in the dim light, then counted the trees as he followed the deer path to the edge of the clearing and out into the open. "You're late," said Jude Modesto. The fat man was trying to sound like an important fellow who'd been kept waiting, but he wasn't very convincing. Stillman and his two bodyguards stood by the copter, the same two huge men who were only a couple of bad haircuts and two pairs of lycra shorts away from looking like professional wrestlers. "You changed the meeting time," Colin said flatly. "It wasn't easy for me to arrange things." Unlike Modesto, Colin knew that the less emotion you put into your voice, the less you had to worry about giving away how you really felt, which, in his case, was nervous. He'd just noticed that both of the bodyguards were wearing holsters over their dark shirts. Holsters with guns in them. "Well, Needle," he reminded himself, "you wanted to play with the big boys." And that's where we're going to stop. I think we have about 1 or 2 nights left. Well, at least one, but maybe as many as 2. And that's where I'm going to wrap it up for the night. So, did I ever say hello to everybody tonight? I don't think I did. I think I forgot after all that. So I will say hello to everybody now, at least everybody who checked in. Then some of them may be gone already, but that's all right. So anyway, so Barbie Ann, hello, lovely to see you. Jerry, the you-nankster, Anyway, the past, the future, the present walked into a saloon. It was tense. Oh, you bad, bad man. Tim, good to see you, Tim. Thank you for joining us. Chris Vandal, a pleasure, and thank you. Why is Brothers of the Wind so thin you could barely beat an intruder unconscious with it? Well, Chris, as I think I said somewhere on Twitter or something, you got to think bigger. Yes, this is not one of my books you can bludgeon someone to death with, but it's slender enough you could probably stab them to death with it. Chris, hello, Chris Fab, or Fab, depending on how it's pronounced. Good to see you, as always. And thank you again, Chris, for all of your putting up of the things on Facebook and, on YouTube and things like that. Jared, hello. Oh, that is a terrible joke. Jared says, hello, Tad. I think this is the first time I've seen you play BASS live. Bass, fish. Got it? Okay. Just ghastly. Congratulations. My family, by the way, we are big admirers of the horrible dad joke, in part because my own dad is one of the, a world-class ambassador for bad dad jokes. So, and I picked it up. I do it to torment my young ones, but now my kids have gotten really good at it too. Everybody in the family loves really awful jokes and making each other go, oh, God, I hate you forever. Anyway, Jeremy, hello, Jeremy. Good to see you. Kristen, there you are. Good to see you too. Becca, a pleasure. Deb, thank you for the kind comments on the fish. Becca's cats hate their fish too. No, thank you, Chris. It does not smell like fish. Barban, good to see you. Kelly, a pleasure. Felicity, hello, darling. Good to see you in Kiwi land there. Just a question from what do writers benefit more, buying a paperback book or buying an ebook? That's actually a good question. I don't know the answer to it because I think it depends on from contract to contract. My guess is that they're roughly similar. So buy whatever works best for you. Or if you can't afford one of my books, that's what libraries are for. So believe me, I'm not trying to peddle every single possible copy of every book I can to everybody. If you can't afford a book, take it out of the library. Keep the libraries in business too. Anyway, Kristen, yes, I'm saying hello now, but you're right. I completely forgot. James, yes, James says a paper book from an independent shop is best for the book ecosystem on the whole, but slightly worse for the environment. Yeah, that's probably true. But I do also believe very strongly in bookstores. I've spent so much of my life in bookstores and libraries. I love them both unreservedly. So support your local bookstores, support your local libraries. Ray, hello, Ray. Good to see you. Saul, a pleasure. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Julian, or Julian, depending again on where you're coming in from. Who else? Sonia. Hello, Sonia. Good to see you. So I think I got everybody, and I think we're now a little bit past 10, so I'm going to say good night. So for me, the cat, the dogs, the snake, the automatic fake fish, and everything else, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for putting up with my changing the times. As I said, important birthday dinner, had to go out, had to drive a ways to get there. I will be back to the same times next week. That's 7 p.m. on Sundays and 1 a.m. on early Sunday morning for the first thing of the weekend. Bear in mind, we now have gone through daylight savings here in California, but if you found tonight's broadcast, you probably are aware of that. So anyway, 1 a.m. and then again at 7 p.m. Thank you so much. A real pleasure to share time with you. Y'all be good to yourselves, be good to those around you, and I will talk to you next week. Okay.